Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Shooting the Breeze, the formal firearms podcast of WaltandPA.com. And this is the episode that almost didn't make it. If you remember watching or listening to episode 3, I made mention that I was going away this past weekend, and I wasn't sure what that was going to do to the podcast, whether or not it was going to push it for another week. Well, as my weekend trip grew near, I started feeling kind of bad about maybe pushing the podcast. I'm kind of proud of the fact that I'm looking at about 4 episodes now that have been posted on a regular schedule, and they've been routinely coming out. And I have a lot of fun doing these podcasts. So the thought of pushing it, whether it be a couple days or even the bi-weekly schedule I looked at in the beginning, it kind of bummed me out a little bit. So leading into my weekend away, I tried to do a lot of research and put together some stuff for the podcast so that when I returned, I could dive right into it and maybe get it done. I was even looking at possibly doing it on Thursday night before I left on Friday, and that really didn't work out. I had a little bit of time, but I just wasn't feeling it. I just couldn't make it work. I started the recorder up. I recorded about 5 minutes and just thought, I just don't have I just don't feel it. I don't have the energy. I don't want to half-ass it, so to speak, and go into this just kind of bummed out and all, lackadaisical and boring. Not that these podcasts are much better, but I feel energetic and I feel good and I enjoy doing them, and I like doing them when I feel this way. So I wound up not doing the podcast Thursday night. I went away on Friday, and originally the plan was to stay in Easton for the famous Smoke Shop Cigar Expo / Cigarnival, big cigar event that I was covering as press. The idea was to stay there Friday, Saturday, and then come home Sunday morning, and maybe try to work this in Sunday afternoon, Monday at the latest. It is Monday night now, but with the idea of posting this on Tuesday. So my plan kind of fell apart. Hurricane Irene came up the coast, and we wound up leaving the famous Smoke Shop Cigar Expo early, and we came home Saturday late afternoon, evening-ish. Basically what happened is we kept reading or seeing weather reports and checking our phones and stuff, and it was looking pretty nasty. I mean, we're in Pennsylvania. We probably weren't going to get slammed very hard, but in the area that we were in Easton, it's prone to flooding, and we've had a really wet month this particular month. So we were expecting a lot of water problems, and when the dark storm clouds rolled in and the event was over, we just decided, you know what, let's pack it up, let's head home, and we'll skip the after party and the dinner and stuff, and we'll cover what we've got. And we ended up having a really good time. We made it home before the weather turned nasty, and it turns out parts of Easton were evacuated due to flooding down towards the river, but I'm not sure what that did for the Cigar Expo later that evening. But that's kind of where we're at today. I'm home. I actually wound up having an extra day at home to prepare for the podcast, and here we are Monday night, kind of last minute, but I'm feeling it tonight. So let's get this thing rolling. Let's get this party started, however you want to lead into the podcast. Well, just as in past podcasts, the first segment of the show is the news. And basically how I generate this news is I have a Google alert set up that pushes news items to Google Reader, my preferred RSS reader, and I use a bunch of keywords: self-defense, pistol, firearm, rifle, shotgun, a variety of and/or statements in there to generate a decent list of newsworthy items. And throughout the week, in between one podcast and the next, I generally keep an eye on that reader and pick out the ones that interest me. And as time narrows down and we get time to do the podcast, I pick the top 3 that interest me and feature them here. So here we are. Here are the 3 items, the first of which comes from the South Ward Patch. And this was published pretty recently, August 22nd, and this really grabbed my attention. I gotta close out all these little advertisements so that I can read it, but The article is entitled "Toy Gun Swap Aimed at Educating Newark Youth." So, here we go. The first ever Stop Shootin' Music Toy Gun Exchange program went off with a bang Monday afternoon in Newark's Mildred Helms Park, as nearly 90 plastic pistols were traded in for more kid-friendly toys. Children came in droves to exchange toy guns for more suitable objects like basketballs and Barbie dolls during the 4-hour event, hosted by the nonprofit organization. The exchange, attended and backed by city council members, including Mayor Cory Booker, was created to impress upon youth that guns are not toys. "We're using music as a conduit to stop the trend of incessant gun violence," said Al Tarek Onique. Wow, that's one hell of a name there. Co-founder of Stop Shootin' Music, a spin-off of Stop Shootin' Incorporated, created in late 2010. "So we said, let's start with the youth and have them lead by example. I think it's a great first step forward." To kick off the exchange, Onique, wow, I'm going to have to feed that through like Google Translate or something and see if I can get the computer to actually pronounce that word, because I have no idea how it's pronounced. O-N-Q-U-E. Anyway, and fellow Stop Shootin' Music co-founder Brent Chicago Jones Rogers and Alfred Picasto Dill performed their song "Put Your Guns Down," which preached "Stop shootin' and think about the precious little brains you're polluting." There is a video incorporated into this, however I have not watched it, and nor do I have much interest in it, to be honest with you. Kids then traded in their toy guns and selected a new toy from the trove of goodies. Cousins Troy Walker, 10, and Krishad Walker, 9, and friend Laren Holston, 13, went home with New Jersey Devils hockey sticks, pucks, and headphones and remote control cars. "I think toy guns are bad because little kids get a habit and grow up and want to shoot people," said Troy Walker, who wants to one day become a police officer so that he can save the world. Meanwhile, Shanae Bunn, 10, hoped to receive a new book to read to her 3-year-old brother. "Every day on the news, I hear about someone getting shot or stabbed," said Bunn, who dreams of attending Harvard to become a dentist. Bunn noted the importance of Thursday's event, saying that sometimes hears of gun violence, saying she sometimes hears of gun violence near her home on Brunswick Street. "Every week someone gets killed or shot over there," she said. In addition to a new toy, each child received an age-appropriate book donated by Bookham Newark program, which aims to distribute 100,000 books to children in the city this year. The program's goal is to boost literacy among youth in the city, an effort South Ward Councilman Ras Baraka has staunchly supported through his campaign this summer. Literacy is probably the number one deterrent to crime that gets under-talked about, under-resourced, underutilized, said Baraka, whose South Ward Reads program is ongoing. Literacy is key. Populations of cities that have low crime have high literacy and high civic engagement. Referring to gun culture as American ideal, Baraka said it's an issue that needs to be combated through public events like Mondays. "Violence is as American as apple pie," said Baraka. "You have to teach kids early that guns are not toys and that when people get shot, sometimes they don't get back up." A total of 4 people were shot and killed in separate incidents throughout Newark last weekend, putting an end to a 20-day murder-free period in the city. Booker announced a man accidentally shot himself Monday near Mildred Helms Park. "This is really what our community needs," said Booker of the exchange program. "We don't just need police, law enforcement. We need really activism in our community, taking back our streets, taking back our neighborhoods." The Toy Gun Exchange program will continue Friday into Saturday, when Baraka and other city activists will host 24-hour peace, unity, and black resistance to violence on Clinton and Tracy Avenues in South Ward. Once a sizable amount of toy guns is collected, Stop Shootin' will likely have a press conference to unveil the recovered fake weapons, according to Onkwe. "Like the same way they do when they get the real guns. we're going to lay them all out and mark them the same way, he said. We're going to take a picture of it. These are the guns we've taken out of the hands of children. Okay, I kind of butchered that article, but you get the gist of it. Much like the gun swaps that you typically see throughout cities, this one is aimed at children's toys, and much like the gun buyback programs that you see for adults, where adults bring in guns in exchange for cash or some sort of credit card, like gift card thing. These children are trading in their toy guns for other toys, and that in itself, I think is kind of cool. A kid has something they don't want, they can trade it in for something else. But I think that the idea of these gun buybacks, I've never really liked the idea of it. I don't necessarily think they do much of anything. I mean, you give amnesty to whoever is turning in the gun. You get guns that may not even function, and you're giving people cash for these guns. And I don't know that it really solves anything. And I don't know, I think you're passing on this potential for doing absolutely no good to children, and you're telling them this is a good idea, this is going to solve anything. Your toy gun is not a real gun. I'm getting all flustered. I just don't see any good coming out of this program. I don't understand what the good is. Educating children is always a great thing. However, I don't know that you're really sending them the right message with this particular news piece. I don't know. I can't quite get my head around it to generate an opinion. I'm just kind of baffled by it. All right, well, that was the first news item that I kind of stumbled all over myself on my opinion. Basically, I just don't see... I don't see where that type of program does any real good for the community. I mean, those guns that were turned in, would they really have been used in a crime? By getting them off the street, do you really solve anything? I've actually heard lots of stories of people on forums and stuff loving these gun buyback programs. They take their old non-working guns, they take them down there, they trade them in for cash, and there you go. They're perfectly acceptable, regardless of whether or not they actually function. The community accepts them, claims to have gotten this gun off the street. It's going to prevent crime, and in a case of a gun forum member, he just traded in a piece of garbage that never worked in the first place, and he got cash for it. He got much more than it was worth, because it didn't work. It wasn't worth anything. So, applying the same logic to toys, I just don't see I just don't see it. I don't understand how it would potentially be any good. But whatever works for the community, I guess. It's just it's a non-profit organization, so hey, it's not taxpayer money, I guess. So this leads into the next news article, which I thought was pretty interesting. This was I actually came across this on a forum, and it's based on recording police officers, and I'll talk a little bit more about my opinion on that, or why this kind of interested me recently after I get done reading it. Now, this article comes from the American Cop magazine, and it is entitled "Vantage Point" by Susie Huntington, Expecting Privacy in Public. And this is a magazine for cops, by cops, I would assume. It's definitely for cops with a name like American Cop magazine. However, I would assume most of the writers for this magazine are involved in the law enforcement, what is that word I'm looking for? They're law enforcement officers of some form or another, or in the field in some form or another. So here we go. Again, this is an opinion piece. I was watching Stossel, I believe, on the Fox Business Channel recently, hosted by investigative reporter John Stossel. The show's theme, Privacy or Secrecy, looked at issues relating to the perception societies losing their rights to privacy. From smartphone technology tracking your every move and data mining of personal information from internet sites to a movement making the personal information public about legal gun owners. The segment, Who Watches the Watchman, caught my eye because it dealt with the subject of whether or not it should be illegal for citizens to record cops in public. The debate over filming/recording cops in the performance of their duties has raged for decades, and it's reaching a fever pitch thanks to cell phone and pint-sized digital cameras, and these ease of immediately posting images onto the internet. So what's the big deal? Are cameras now considered the new great equalizer? Aren't we known for saying, if you've got nothing to hide, what are you worried about? This same mentality should also apply to us. If we're doing our job professionally and within the law, what have we got to worry about if someone's filming us, especially if they're doing so without getting in our way? If we decide we don't like being filmed and take our attention away from what we're doing, we are the ones delaying ourselves, not the person filming us. If the person is making snide comments, ignore it unless the comments are inciting a riot. But then again, it will all be caught on film, right? So, should we ever expect to have a right to privacy when we're in the public? I don't think so. Cops are public employees. We can record comments and statements made by suspects/arrestees sitting in the back of our police cars where there's no expectation of privacy. Thus, there should be an even lower standard of privacy outside the police car. We routinely record and surveil citizens without their permission. So why should there be a separate set of rules regarding them recording or filming us? If a bad guy doesn't have the consent to being filmed, cops shouldn't either. Should Internal Affairs be required to get consent to film or record from a cop suspected of criminal or unprofessional conduct? It's my understanding wiretapping laws are being applied to such cases where citizens have been arrested for taping officers in the course of their duties. Some states, Arkansas, California, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Maryland, Montana, New Hampshire, Ohio, Texas, and West Virginia, are two-party consent states, meaning both or all parties must consent before taping. Should this then make all cop surveillance taboo? How slippery of a slope does this need to be? Law enforcement has been using dash cams for years, and now recording devices are worn on the officer's uniform. Think tasers, Axon, or EHS vidmics. I don't know of any states declaring only the police are allowed to collect evidence, and that's the purpose behind these devices. They're also used to mitigate liability in the event of misconduct allegation, but it's still evidence. What's really disturbing is the officers who appear to be misbehaving are the ones reacting in outrage that they're being videotaped. Perhaps there's a lesson here. I think back a number of times I was made aware I was being taped, and I don't recall ever giving a rat's ass about it. I was also never hauled into IA to watch a video of me misbehaving either. So maybe those of us getting our skirts up over our heads about this should take a long, hard look in the mirror before crying foul. The reality is, cops have very public jobs, like it or not. We're expected to behave professionally, even when faced with overwhelming challenges. The public generally knows that we've got tough jobs, but no one is forcing us to do it. Some people have an axe to grind with police tactics. There's no changing this mindset, and they'll do their best to catch us making a mistake, misbehaving, abusing our authority, or losing control. It happens sometimes to the best of us. It's best to admit our mistake and take our lumps. Look at any of the silly reality cop shows on TV these days. Please tell me how dragging around a film crew is any different than what the average citizen is doing. Recording with high-end professional cameras nets the same results as some guy with an iPhone or a pocket video recorder. It's not reasonable to believe documenting police activity is only acceptable when it makes you look good. Celebrities put up with all the photographing and videotaping associated with their careers, even when they may look like hell. But it's all part of their very public lives. Cops need to understand we're not much different. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time was a favorite saying of a TV show cop Beretta from the 1970s. I think it's still valid today. So a pretty interesting article, and the reason that that caught my eye is I was a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even a couple of months ago, I came across this copblock.org, and I found it kind of interesting. I was watching some of the videos that they had, and basically there were two guys that were going into this local jail to bail out a friend, and what their thing is they record everything. So they go into the jail, they talk to someone behind the counter, they get the approval to record the event, and then at some point later, someone comes out, or they leave to get cash or something, and when they come back a short time later, they're confronted by a police officer who demands that they leave. They're trespassing in this public building. He demands that their video recording cameras be turned off, and you know, these two guys are pointing out that, look, we've already have gotten the green light. You're recording us all over your lobby. What's the big deal? And it eventually turns into those two individuals being arrested because they refused to leave, and they refused to turn the recording equipment off. And I was kind of watching that, and as a result of watching that, I watched some other stuff, and it's kind of scary how upset some police officers get when they find out they're being recorded. I mean, I remember watching some other video I came across where there were a couple of teenagers who were skateboarding or something in a city, and this cop pulls up in this little golf cart thing, and he just like goes nuts on these kids. He's screaming at them, he's cursing at them, he's demanding their respect, and he threatens the one kid, says something along the lines of, if that phone in your hand is recording, you're going to be sorry. Meanwhile, the kid's like holding the phone out, and he's recording the whole conversation. You know, it's kind of got it down to his side and stuff. So, you know, seeing some of this stuff is really crazy and scary, but at the same time, when a lot of this goes on, you see a lot of wrongdoing. So I think the article is interesting in that if you have nothing to hide, you really shouldn't worry about it from a public servant standpoint. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but when you're out in public, there's no expectation of privacy, and being an employee of the people, so to speak, I don't think that you have that right to say, no, you're not permitted to record me doing my public job for the public. It's just kind of strange. Good, really interesting article for it, standing up for the rights of the people willing to or wanting to record police officers in their duties. And really, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. You know, again, if a police officer can record me during a traffic stop or wherever I'm stopped via, you know, uniform mics or video recording equipment, there's no reason I shouldn't be able to do the same. So, interesting piece, and I just thought I'd share it. All right, well, that brings us to the last news article of the episode, and this one I came across via Google Reader, and it was kind of interesting. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I thought the article was kind of interesting nonetheless. And it is from My SA, San Antonio's homepage. And this one says that San Antonio gun store sues ATF. A San Antonio gun shop is suing the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. A San Antonio gun shop is suing the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, arguing the agency exceeded its authority by ordering licensed dealers to report some rifle sales. I always stumble over that because growing up it was always the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and now they've slipped explosives in there at some point, and I always miss it. I always say tobacco and firearms, and then I end up saying and explosives on top of it. So that was the first paragraph. Now that I'm done babbling. The store, 10 Ring Precision Inc. on Blue Crest Lane on the north side, is challenging a policy ATF put into place last month regarding firearm sellers in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California to report the sale of 2 or more of certain rifles over a 5-day period in an effort to reduce gun smuggling to Mexico, where drug-related violence killed 15,000 last year. In the lawsuit, 10 Ring states that unlike handgun reporting requirements, which are required by Congress, the requirement to report the sales of semi-automatic rifles with detachable clips and larger than .22 caliber outside the scope of criminal investigation goes beyond ATF's authority. The company also claims ATF is violating its customers' privacy by keeping a database of arms sales, which will discourage purchases. The rub for them is that, first of all, it's going to cost them time and money to implement this because these forms have to be filled out. They've got to set up systems to keep track of sales of rifles, said Richard Gardiner, a Virginia lawyer and former counsel for the National Rifle Association. That's an expense. And then if they don't do it, they're subject to license revocation. 2 Arizona gun sellers, one of which Gardiner represents, and an Albuquerque, New Mexico gun store are challenging ATF's policy as well. A spokesman for ATF said the Bureau has authority under 1968 Gun Control Act to collect data about firearm sales. ATF will vigorously defend its authority to collect information about multiple sales of certain rifles from licensed dealers in the 4 states along the southwest border, Bureau spokesman Drew Wade wrote in an email. Alex Hamilton, a 10 Rings president, said the lawsuit speaks for itself, but dinged ATF over the revelation that an investigation by agents in Arizona resulted in guns reaching criminals in Mexico. They're punishing dealers for their gun smuggling, Hamilton said. The ATF has reported that 70% of the 29,284 firearms Mexico submitted to the U.S. for tracing in 2009 and 2010 came from this country. It's not clear how many more firearms were seized in Mexico during that time. And that's the entire article. And I say I'm not really up to speed on this whole thing because I haven't been following the gun runner whole issue very closely, and I don't know the finer points of how this all works with Congress saying that one set of rules should be applied and ATF doing their own thing. However, I'm really big on not liking certain government agencies or areas doing their own thing when they don't have the authority to do it. I don't like these subsets of authority making up their own rules as they go. We see that a lot in Pennsylvania with cities like Philadelphia making up their own gun rules when the state clearly says that this is the way it's going to be, and then Philadelphia says, no, we're an urban area, we need these extra laws for safeguarding the people. I don't like when that happens, and it kind of grates on my nerves, and seeing this whole thing again in this news article saying that ATF doesn't have the authority to do it kind of irks me even more. And I think he's got a point in that, you know, the ATF is punishing these gun store owners for their mistake in this whole gun runner fiasco. So, or Fast and Furious fiasco, whatever it is, a gun walker. But I thought it was kind of interesting and it was worth bringing up. And that's going to close out this segment on the news, and that is going to lead us into segment 2 of the podcast. So sit tight. Well, welcome to segment 2 of Shooting the Breeze podcast, episode 4. This is the part of the podcast where I feature content that I came across the web. A lot of times it's stuff that I've found interesting on various blogs, forums, video podcasts, audio podcasts, you know, that type of thing. Anything that I read regarding guns that I find interesting that's not news gets pushed into this featured content area. And this is where I kind of look at something, apply my own opinion, and then suggest you go check it out and read it for yourself. Now, in episode 3, I had mentioned that excuse me, this part of the podcast in that particular episode had to be cut short because I didn't really find anything that really interested me. I mean, the featured content was kind of slow coming, and this week I found more content, so I thought I would share it. Now, one of these items goes back a little ways. I read it a couple of weeks ago, but I thought it was really good when I read it and very interesting, and I thought it was better than some of the stuff that I read recently, so I kind of flushed it out. So not all of this is really recent, but it's definitely read-worthy or worth checking out. It's definitely worth the time to read it. And this first piece of featured content comes from a blog entitled View from the Porch. It's written by Tam, who is from Indianapolis, and her blog URL is booksbikesboomsticks.blogspot.com. Now, this particular article, I came across it because I'm a reader of Snowflakes in Hell. It's a blog written by Sebastian. It's updated vigorously multiple times throughout the day. A lot of times it's nice, quick little blurbs about news topics, political stuff. It's focused primarily on guns, and it's good, quick chunks of information. I like reading it. And there was a bit of drama going on between another blog that I featured before, which kind of shed some light onto a practice that I'm really not a fan of. So I ended up dumping the blog from my RSS reader, just because I don't particularly care for that practice of blogging. And this particular piece of content was lifted. The featured piece of content was lifted and placed on that other blog, and that's how it came to my attention. Since then, I've plugged this particular blog into my RSS reader and have been keeping an eye on it here and there. And this particular article is kind of interesting because it explains how this person, Tam, was... She formerly worked at a pawn shop, and she dealt with guns a lot. And she talks about this one scenario where they used to deal with this guy that owned a gun shop, and he was always bringing things in to sell. And in this one particular time, he brings a gun in, he puts it on the counter, they make an offer, he kind of changes his mind, takes the gun back. And in this exchange, everyone is checking the chamber, the gun is safe, tags are written up for the gun, it's ready to go in the case, but the guy changes his mind. So he takes the gun, goes out to his car, and then before he leaves, he decides he's going to sell the gun after all. So he goes back into the pawn shop, he hands the gun over, he just says, okay, I'm going to take the deal. And, the tag was already written up, they had just dealt with the guy, just a few short minutes ago. So a tag was placed on the gun, and in the case it went. Well, at some point in time, a customer was handling the firearm, and it went off. Apparently, this guy went out to his car, loaded the gun, and then changed his mind, and it wasn't chamber checked, when it was brought back in. And Tam goes on to say that this has been a very important lesson to her, because it reminds her to always chamber check constantly. And I think that's very important, because I tend to do it a lot too. If I'm home and I'm cleaning my guns, or just handling them, I know they're unloaded because I unloaded them, I separated the magazine's empty, whatever the case is. I know it's empty, but when I pick it up, I check it just instinctively. I rack the slide or open the cylinder, I make sure that it's empty. A lot of times I'll stick my finger inside the chamber to make sure there's nothing there in case maybe I don't see it. And I try to get in the practice of doing it as often as I can. Every now and again I get tripped up because I'll be at a gun shop or I'll be at a range or something, and I'll clear the gun, I'll chamber check it visually, physically with my finger, it's empty, I hand it to someone to look at a range. They're looking at it, and then they hand it back to me, and then sometimes I won't check it, and once or twice I got called out on it. He said, safety-wise, you should really check that, and I always kind of kick myself when I do it, even though it's been a couple of seconds and I know that the slide hasn't been racked or anything like that. Nothing has been put in the gun. I've been standing there. They've had the gun for, less than 60 seconds, but I still kick myself for not checking it anyway. And this is a really interesting story of how a simple mistake could get pretty dangerous. I don't believe anyone was hurt in this particular instance, but I found it to be a really interesting read, and it reminded me of those times when I didn't check the chamber when I should have, even though it was a very short period of time between when I checked it and handed it over to when I got it back again. Here's a prime example. The gun was handed over back to the owner. He takes it out to his car, brings it back in, and is loaded at some point in between, and it was never checked, and it goes off in a customer's hand. So, interesting reading. I'm going to include the URL, or the link to this article, in the show notes, and you can check it out for yourself. Definitely worth reading. Alright, it is time for the second piece of featured content, and earlier I mentioned that I picked one particular piece that was older than the rest. Now, this one wasn't quite as old as I thought it was. However, I've got one that's older than this yet that I plan on featuring in a later episode because I have kind of stuff to add to it. But this particular featured content comes from Shelly from over at Gun Nuts Media. Now, I had mentioned before that I really like Shelly's writing. It's friendly for newer shooters like myself, and I feel, I don't know, I really soak up the information that she provides, because she presents it in such a way where I don't feel as though I'm being buried or anything's going over my head. It's not overly technical. It's very simplified, and I feel as though it applies to me more so than Caleb's stuff, which is more competition oriented. But anyway, this particular piece, again, comes from Shelly at Gun Nuts Media, and it is on double mag pouches. And Shelly goes over 3 types of double mag pouches: a CompTac, Blackhawk, and Blade Tech. Now, recently I got into USPSA shooting. Back in July, I shot my first match. I loved it, and a double mag pouch was a piece of gear that I needed. So I went down to the Handgunner in Topton, Pennsylvania, and I talked to one of the guys behind the counter. Well, it turns out that the guy behind the counter was the match director for the USPSA match being held right down the road. So we got to talking about competing and what I would need. I had already purchased a Phobos holster, a paddle holster, some time ago, and the sole purpose of that holster was USPSA. I wanted it just for that. And I was in the shop looking for a double mag pouch because I knew I would need one for the match. And I wound up buying, I don't even know what I bought. I thought it was a CompTac, but it looks nothing like the picture Shelly shows. So I'm not quite sure what I bought, but it stands far off the belt. It has a single adjustment to move the body in and out to increase or reduce tension on the mags. It works fairly well. However, it feels kind of bulky because it sticks off my side a lot. Much like the Phobos paddle holster, I feel like it sticks way off my side. And one of the things I don't like about it is how much it sticks off the side. Now, granted, it's for competition. I don't need to conceal it. However, if I were to do IDPA or something like that, I don't think I could conceal it well. Or, you know, when I would like my equipment to kind of carry over, potentially to carry gear, more or less. And I want that kind of feel, and I don't get it from this particular mag pouch. So I bought this mag pouch anyway because it was what they had, and I only bought one. It was all they had. They had different styles, but I just bought the one. And when it came match time, I was told, hey, you know, sure enough, someone will lend you whatever equipment you need, and I was counting on that to get a look at something else. And while I was there, Ryan, I believe his name, lent me a Blade Tech holster, and the thing worked great. I liked it much more. It hugged the body a little better. The mags seemed to come in and out of it better. And I really appreciated that. Now I kind of want to ditch the one that I have and pick up 2 Blade Tech holsters, but the whole purpose of this article is just to give you a little bit of idea of what to expect from these holsters that she has used in competition, and she gives you her opinion and allows you to build on it and make your own purchase, or formulate your own opinion and make a purchase based on her experience. And I thought it was really interesting and definitely worth reading if anyone out there is interested in getting into any sort of competitive shooting, especially USPSA. So if you get the chance, head over to Gun Nuts. I'll include the link in the show notes, and definitely check it out. Alright, well, before I get into the last piece of featured content, I need to make a bit of a retraction, or fix a mistake that I made, without going back and re-recording that whole segment. On numerous occasions, I mentioned, or I said the word holster when I was referring to the mag pouch. I was referring to the Blade Tech mag pouch, not the Blade Tech holster. It's something that I also want to look into purchasing. So again, rather than go back and record that whole piece all over again, I just want to tell you that when I said holster, I meant mag pouch. So with that said, now let's roll into the third piece of featured content. Third piece of featured content. Now this comes from Todd G over at pistoltraining.com, and it is basically a dry fire routine, and it's laid out. It's a several week program where you go through all of these different reps, and it gives you skill training on shooting both hands, strong arm only, weak hand only, and it gives you a nice variety of trigger time. And it doesn't cost you anything because you're dry firing. You're firing the gun with no ammunition in it, and you're just sort of drawing and dropping the hammer so that you can learn trigger control, because in a striker fired gun or even a hammer fired gun, you can rack the slide, and in my case, With my M&P, you can fire it with the magazine empty and the chamber empty. So you can go through the motions and practice the trigger without actually having to fire live ammunition. So when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is great. I've been using pistol training for quite a while. I actually printed out a whole bunch of their drills, a lot of their drills actually. I put them in sheet protectors, I put them in a binder, and every now and again I take that binder to the range and I just page through it and I select a drill and I practice it live fire. And what I'll do is I'll actually print off the targets that they refer to. So if they've got a routine that tells you to use this particular target and fire this way, in the back of the binder I'll pull out that target, I'll stick it on the target stand, and I'll go through that drill, and I'll continue to go through the binder and pick things that look interesting or I feel as though I need work on while I'm at the range. And it's just it's a great resource for drills, live fire drills. And when I saw this dry fire routine, I thought, this is great. I definitely want to give this a try. It's not only good in a practical sense for getting to know your carry firearm, but it's great if you're looking into getting into competitive shooting, like I am with USPSA. So this is definitely something I am going to try. I don't know if I can work this into some sort of video or post and give you my, give you some progress reports along the way, but I thought this was great. I printed it out. It's going to go in my binder, and I'm definitely going to start giving this a try at home with a safe, empty gun. And I want to see just how well it works, because dry firing is something that everyone tells you to do that is in USPSA or IDPA. They tell you it's the best way to practice without actually spending money on live ammunition. And you can do it in the convenience of your own home. So I want to give this a try. I haven't really done much dry fire practice, but now that I have a routine lined out and ready to go for me, where I can just read over this and do these repetitions in a few minutes, or in the morning before work or after work or whatever the case may be, I definitely want to give it a try and see how it works out. And if you're looking at giving dry fire practice a try, I'm going to give you the link to this article in the show notes where you can check it out. And I would highly suggest you go check it out if you're at all interested in dry fire training. Well, here we are with segment 3, the last portion of the podcast, and this is where I talk a little bit about the cigar that I'm smoking and the adult beverage, or any beverage for that matter, that I'm partaking in during the recording of the podcast. Now, leading up to this, I got to talking to my friends Jerry, Brian, and Mike over at Stogie Review, in which I am co-founder of, and I asked them, hey, look, I want to do these cigar and drink pairing things on my gun podcast, and it would be kind of weird if I did a little sponsored by video myself and then led into it. So why don't you guys do me a favor and record a little Stogie Review promo to go along with this, so that I can say, here's the cigar and drink pairing sponsored by Stogie Review, or yeah, that's probably the best word for it, sponsored by Stogie Review, and then I'll lead into your video, and then I can come back and I can dive right into it. This way it doesn't seem weird when I go to a commercial featuring myself. So here is the part where I say cigar and drink pairing sponsored by Stogie Review, and then I lead into a video from Brian Hewitt.
Hey, it's Brian here from Stogie Review. If you like cigars, and I'll bet you do, how about you go over and check out StogieReview.com. Just, it's a bunch of guys. We smoke a lot of cigars. We talk about them. We tell you what we think. You can trust me because I'm wearing my thinking glasses. So check it out, StogieReview.com.
Well, that was my good friend Brian Hewitt from Stogie Review, and I didn't really like that clip. I tried to add a little Barry White feel with the groovy music behind him, but it just didn't work out. The feel wasn't there, so I think I may need to adjust that clip a little bit, swap out the music, and refine it for a later episode. But anyway, as Brian said, you should definitely check out Stogie Review if you're interested in cigars, and this is the part where I tell you what I'm smoking and what I'm drinking. Now, the cigar is the 601 La Bamba from 601. It's also EO brands. They're made by Eddie Ortega and Eric Espinosa of 601. It's their brand. However, it is made by who makes these? Don Pepin Garcia, I believe, makes these cigars, and they're distributed by Rocky Patel. Now, this particular cigar is one of the new additions to the 601 lineup. If you're familiar with the lineup at all, there was once a black label, which was a Connecticut. There was a red label, Habano, a blue label, Maduro, and a red label, Oscuro. Or red label was the Habano. Or did I already say red label? There is the black, which is Connecticut. I hate to do this all over again, but black is Connecticut, green is Oscuro, red is Habano, blue is Maduro, and the yellow now is the La Bamba. Now, of all of these cigars, the La Bamba is by far the most powerful. It's kind of like the firecracker of the bunch, and it even has that firecracker look to it because the cap has this giant little pigtail on it, and it sort of looks like those old, bombs with or a firecracker with the fuse. It kind of has that feel of like the old Mario video games where you pull the bomb out of the ground, it's black, it's got the fuse that's burning. It kind of has that feel to it. And it's got the power behind it to be called La Bamba. It is very powerful. It is the kind of cigar that kicks you in the teeth. Lots of flavor, lots and lots of strength. It is by far the most powerful 601 that I've had, and I enjoy it quite a bit. It is made in Nicaragua, and that's really all there is to say about it. It's just a Nicaraguan cigar that really has tons and tons of power behind it. It's a nice balance, though. It's not overwhelming. It's not the type of cigar that'll make you sick, or at least it doesn't make me nauseous or ill. And it's a cigar that goes very well in the evening. Now, I've been mixing it up, trying to smoke these things with different beverages to see what works, and I haven't really found that perfect pairing yet. Tonight, I am pairing the La Bamba with a Mount Gay Extra Old Rum, which is made in Barbados. I love Zaya and Ranza Kappa rum. I find them to be very sweet and very, very smooth. This, while it has a little bit of the sweetness, it has a bit of a bite. It has more of a bourbon kind of bite to it than the smooth sweetness of some of the rums that I drink, mainly Zaya and Ranza Kappa. But the pairing is working out really well. It's a cigar that I'm very fond of. Eddie Ortega was kind enough to send me a box of 10 a little while back because I didn't make it to the trade show and he wanted me to try them. So he sent me a 10-count box, and I think I'm down to like 1 after this. I've just really been enjoying them a lot and smoking them quite often. The big long pigtail, you've seen the pigtails in the cigars before. They're usually wound up pretty tight. They're easy to cut off. This thing is long. It's kind of annoying. You gotta peel it back and feed it through the cutter and then clip the cigar. I mean, I guess you don't have to, but that's typically the way I do it. It's a nice little novelty, but it gets old pretty fast. Either way, I really enjoy the cigar, and it's going fairly well with this rum. I don't know whether or not we reviewed it on Stogie Review or not. If we did, the link will be in the show notes so that you can check out the full review of this cigar instead of this little blurb where I just tell you how much I like the cigar and don't really give you any information on it. Because, again, I don't want to get too in-depth on this cigar because this is a gun podcast, and I don't want to scare away anyone that's not into cigars. So that's all there is to say about that. Alright, now that the cigar and drink pairing is out of the way, it is time to talk about just a featured discussion topic for this particular episode. Now, I was kind of glancing at the clock leading into this, and I realized that I don't have a whole lot of time left, so I want to briefly cover something that's been on my mind recently, and that has been reloading. Now, I mentioned in the last episode that I went over to Walmart to pick up some 380 so that I could fire my Smith & Wesson Bodyguard a bit more and get more accustomed to it. And I was blown away by the price of 380 at almost $40 a box for 100 rounds. And that sort of sparked this idea of reloading again. Now, a couple of months back, I decided, I want to get into reloading because I want to do more USPSA shooting, and ultimately I think that reloading will reduce the cost a little bit, and it will become just more easier on my wallet if I get into reloading. So I started looking around at different presses, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, do I really need a press? I have one. Back when I was looking into this, I was talking to my father, and he says, hey, I still have your grandfather's old press in the attic. I'll dig it out. You can take a look at it. Maybe you can get the dies you need for it and use it. So he digs it out. It's an old, it's an old Lyman Trueline Jr. press, and he also gave me an old, I believe it's a Lyman reloading manual. The reloading manual is from the 70s, so I definitely need to get something more updated with current powder charges and things like that. But the press is in half decent shape. the paint could definitely use some touching up. You know, it needs to be cleaned and oiled, but the press seems sound. Everything is there with the exception of a powder measure and dies. My dad seems to think he may have some 44 Magnum dies around somewhere because that's what my grandfather was loading at the time. However, they were not with the press. He thinks that if he does some digging around, he can find them. However, I wasn't too concerned about it because I don't have a 44 Magnum to reload and I don't have brass for 44 Magnum. So I was kind of looking at, you know, what do I want to do? Do I want to buy a single stage press? Do I want to buy a progressive? I started asking people on Twitter and Facebook, and I got a lot of opinions that told me skip the single stage press, go right into progressive. That's where you want to be. It loads lots and lots of rounds in a short period of time. You can really crank them out, and you won't have to sit in front of the reloading press forever. And I saw that and I'm thinking, well, you know, that's probably the way to go. However, these Dillon presses are fairly expensive for a progressive, and I don't know that I can really afford to spend that kind of money up front on reloading when something like a Hornady lock and load kit is $300. And in addition to that $300, or in addition to the kit, you also get a rebate for 500 bullets of your choice. So, you know, I'm looking more at that, and I still have people telling me, no, you don't want this single stage press, it'll take you forever. And then I'm doing some reading on like the high road where people are saying, well, you know, the beauty of a single stage press is you really get an intimate knowledge of what each stage is. You go through an entire stage with all the rounds you're reloading, then you change over your dies, and then you move to the next step. After you've done all these rounds again, you move to the next step and the next, and you basically go through one step with all of your rounds and then go through another step with all of your rounds. And it's not like a progressive where you pull the handle and it does multiple operations at one point in time. And every time you pull the handle, the round indexes to a next point and the next operation starts. So basically, once you get through all the operations, every time you pull the lever, a finished cartridge pops out and into your bin. That's great and all. However, it's a major expense. And, you know, I'm kind of getting caught up in that intimacy of a single stage press. Now, it's less money, which is more appealing. It gives me a better understanding of what is going on because you really have to see and understand every step. It's easier to catch mistakes from what I understand. Ultimately, I hear that you will eventually go to a progressive. However, everyone I talk to that uses a single stage still uses a single stage after years and years, and you know, they're very fond of their press. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. However, I am leaning very heavily toward the Hornady locked and load setup with a single stage press. Comes with everything I need to get started reloading, minus brass, bullets. However, there's a rebate for bullets, powder, things like that, primers. So what I may end up doing is setting up the Lyman press to deprime once fired brass, and then use the Hornady setup to actually load each round. Now, I was looking into maybe getting set up with the Lyman and then just buying all the pieces I needed, which wouldn't be too bad. However, it uses these old 310 dies that are kind of outdated. However, you can get a turret conversion, I believe, that uses the newer 7/8 14 dies that you can get pretty much anywhere now. However, by the time you get all that done with bushings and the aftermarket turret, you're looking at like a $75 investment just to get the press up and running to current standards, and then you need all the equipment on top of that. And by the time you do that, by the time you pay for the turret and all that, you're pretty close to buying a brand new Lee single stage press. However, people say that the quality of Lee isn't all that great and that you should really look into something a little more stout. So I don't know whether I should be looking more towards like an RCBS press, or if the Hornady kit is more or less what I should be looking for. I hear great things about RCBS. However, you know, looking at the kit, they come with a balance scale, and the Hornady comes with a digital scale. Now, that's not a huge difference. I mean, the balance scale is probably more accurate, or at least I think it may be. However, it seems to take forever to balance things out, whereas the digital in the Hornady it's all right there. It's a digital readout. You just drop the powder on it and you're good to go. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet. However, I am leaning heavily towards that Hornady kit. if you have a Hornady kit or you reload and you use a single stage press, I would greatly appreciate your input on this decision that I need to go into, because I think that I'm going to get involved in the next couple of months, and again, I'm still kind of on the fence with what I want to do. However, I'm leaning towards the Hornady kit. So that is the feature topic. I'm probably getting really close to my 1 hour time limit, the time limit that I set for myself. So with that said, I want to thank you for watching this episode, all nearly 1 hour of it. I look forward to hearing your comments and some constructive criticism on the episode, just some things that I could do to make this better for you. Help me help you, more or less. So again, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.